extra one, did you?
I keep mine with all my notes on it.
Makes sense.
Right.
How are you?
Tomorrow, Mama says she's gonna stay there for the rest of her life.
See,
I
I
didn't
wish
know
I could just ship my kids off to the in-laws. They're in Texas. So we have winter break too. And I'm like, Ben, you're on your own. Hello again, sir.
Hey, how are you?
Good to see you again. All right, here you go. I'm gonna keep two. Okay. Okay. So I know we've got some statewide changes for them, but they're a little short on their requirements.
I'm sure some of you got places to go and things to do. I think we got 10 agencies today, so it may take us a little while. To begin with, I'd like to call on Chairman Lumpson to ask a blessing, if you would.
You would please bow with me. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your love and your goodness to us and for watching over us and caring for us. We thank you, Lord, for the opportunity that you've given to each of us to be here today. We thank you for the various ways in which everyone present serves this great state. We thank you, Lord, that you've given us the opportunity to serve in the way that we do. And we just ask for your wisdom and your guidance as we seek to do things that are that honor and glorify you and that are beneficial to the people of this great state. We pray it in Jesus' name and for his sake. Amen.
Amen. Okay, does everybody have an agenda? Did we pass out agendas? Okay. Well, let me read it off then. I'm just going to go in the order on the agenda, and I don't know who made the agenda up, but first off would be juvenile court judges, then the business court, then public defenders, then CJCC, then the accountability courts, and Commission on Family Violence, then the Department of Law, and Department of Defense, State Board of Pardons and Paroles, and then Ema Homeland Security. We'll begin with juvenile court judges.
Council of Juvenile Court Judges. Oh, got a little bit louder, sorry. With me today, I would like to introduce, we first have the council's president, Juvenile Court Judge Greg Price. He's from the Rome Judicial Circuit. And then we have our president-elect, Juvenile Court Judge Render Hurd. He is from the Tifton Judicial Circuit. And then also we have the council's executive director, Eric John. And if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and jump into our budget. We're looking on page 3 of the budget document. 7.1.1, this was actually a continuation from the amended 22 budget request that this committee passed. This is an increase to our case management system of $25,000 for the contract. Mr. Chairman, would you like for me to pause to ask questions or just keep going, or?
I'll ask questions as we go along, and after you complete, I'll give the committee members opportunity to ask questions.
Okay, sounds good.
And for those of you, apparently it didn't happen in judiciary, but for those of you that work for state agencies, you'll see a little S alongside of many of the budget items, and that's a something that transpires in every agency, and there's no sense talking about that. It's just standard. Typically, it's the pay raise or what DOS is going to take out of funding, but if you just go through the ones that don't reflect that. Now, the judiciary doesn't have that, so feel free to expound as you need.
Thank you. Okay, our second request is 7.2.1. This is the grants to counties. We are requesting funding that actually supports House Bill 274. This bill was dropped last year by Chairwoman Mandy Ballinger, and this is a $6,000 salary supplement for juvenile court judges with accountability courts. And that amount is $690,000. Mr. Chairman, those are our two requests.
And I don't see the 5% increase, $5,000 in yours.
That's correct. It wasn't added before the governor's document. Brian has all of that information. Brian Groom does.
Typically, he's put it in for everybody else. I don't. So, but what would occur here is under 7.2.1, that would be 690,000 plus the 5,000.
Oh, no, the juvenile court judges do not get the 5,000 supplement or the 5,000 cash increase. They're not state employees, so they do not receive the 5,000.
Oh, their contract?
It's grants to counties. They're paid by a grant.
Okay.
I think-
I thought everybody in state government, we've gone around and around and supplemental about some of it. And turns out some of the people that are state employees but paid by the county get the 5,000. Some that are county employees, they paid by the state don't. So it
Right.
can be a little confusing, but
It is. It's
Yeah.
confusing. I think Chairwoman Ballinger was raising her hand
Well,
to add a comment to it.
Chairman
Mr. Chairman,
Bowden.
I was just going to clarify that they are paid by grant. They're not technically employees of the state. Therefore, they wouldn't be eligible. And I think in light of the raise that everybody else is getting, the very small increase that everybody that is as a result of House Bill 274 is particularly needed.
do we know how many there are across the state?
115. This figure's for 115.
Okay. Any other questions? Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few questions in terms of the average caseload and the processing times. One of the things that we've heard is just the backlog and the impact of the pandemic on processing cases. Can you just talk about where you are and how the funding helps you address that?
If I may, I may call up one of our judges to speak on that, if that's okay.
If I may, Mr. Chairman,
Feel free to speak.
our courts, juvenile courts are a little bit different. We don't do jury trials. Therefore, we didn't have the COVID impact, which required significant separation from the public coming in to serve on grand juries and actual trial juries. So we had an advantage as far as case backlogs. In fact, my court in Floyd County does not have a case backlog because we've been doing court, colloquially speaking, on TVs for the last 2 years. My court's had 3,400 and some odd cases that I've done sitting down in my office, having people Zoom in on Zoom for trials. So most of the juvenile courts do not have any significant backlog. The only ones that we would have that would be some degree of backlog are the ones that do require an in-person constitutional right to in-person trials. And then in many of the courts have used, and many of the juvenile courts have used expanded facilities in their counties to go and spread out and use those. Like in my city, we have the Forum, and the Forum is a large venue which has been kind enough to allow us to use it to have distanced actual in-person trials. So I don't perceive, and from the judges that I've talked to on our council, any significant backlog. Does that get it? All right, good. Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The statewide business courts.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. With me today is our Clerk of Court, Angie Davis, sitting in the back. My name is Walt Davis. For those of you who I don't know, I serve as the judge of the Statewide Business Court. I gave you a lot of background on the court during the supplemental process, but I have a little bit I'd like to talk to you about today. Most of what you'll see in 5.2, all of what you'll see in 5.21 and 5 through 5.27 on page 1 of the budget document really reflects growing pains and lack of sort of foresight on my part. I was appointed to start up this court in 2019. I came from a large law firm with zero budget experience in the state system. And with the help of former Chairman Welch, we came up with a process whereby the court would be attached administratively to the Court of Appeals. I subsequently contracted around that, and now all of my back office comes from the administrative office of the courts, and my IT services come from the Supreme Court. Ms. Davis and I are the two constitutionally appointed officers of the court, but we share a judicial assistant, which is referenced in 5.24. And then on my side of the house, I have 2 one-year term clerks and a staff attorney who I poached from the Metro Atlanta Business Court. And then Ms. Davis has a single deputy clerk. The items 5.21 through 5.27 are precisely what we asked for during the supplemental process. There were 3 items that were zeroed out in that process, and that was 5.22 through 5.24, which effectively were requests for a salary increase. We do not have a court administrator or anybody who serves kind of in that capacity. And I looked up after our last hearing, if I were to ask you for that role, that would be in excess of $100,000, just starting with salary based on the average salary in the state system. So what I tried to do was come to you and say, I've divided the administrative tasks across all 3 of these positions, and Ms. Davis and I share the judicial assistant. And so those reflect a request to increase the 3 salaries as reflected in 5.2 through 5.4. What that did not anticipate was the governor increasing salaries across the board. So what I'm not doing is asking for this plus, but what I would ask for your consideration is for you to take the request in 5.22 through 5.24, subtract whatever that increase was, and allot us the difference if you'd be willing. So I'm happy to entertain any questions you have, but like I said, these are exactly the same as we requested in the supplemental.
Anybody have any questions? That was quick. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Public defenders.
Okay, good afternoon, Chairman.
Get the page. Could you tell me what page that's on? For some reason, I can't seem to locate it.
20 of 23.
23?
20, we're on 20.
You got it ready? I found out last week when I was doing one of these that I get a different copy than everybody else, and my numbers aren't always the same. So I was telling everybody what page to go to, and I found out after the meeting, and I was telling them the wrong pages. I got it.
We have a copy here, Chair.
I got it.
You got it?
It's 23 on mine. So.
Oh. Okay, good afternoon, Chairman Hitchens. I'm Matayo Ali on behalf of the Public Defenders Council. We're just going to go straight into what we're requesting. On page 23, and I believe it's page 23 of what you're looking at, we're asking you to support the governor's proposal of the 5,000. That will be very impactful on supporting our or not just the defendants, but just the attorneys in making sure that they can provide their duties and do what they're supposed to do. Right now, our attrition rate is kind of high, and this is going to be supportive of what we do. I also want to bring to your attention, we watched the Prosecuting Attorneys Council yesterday, and they did ask for a couple of things. We ask you to, along those lines, to support us and give to us what they asked for. We're asking for supplement for our CPDs. As you must know, our CPDs have not received their salaries are statutorily set, so they are still in the same salary that they've had since 2005. If we continue with this, we are not able to compete. So I'm just asking you to please give that until we have an amendment so that we can be in line with what the prosecutors are asking for, that you give us a supplement. It's all in the report that we provided to you. I'm not going to go straight into the details so that we don't take all the time, because it could take a lot of time. We're also asking for the step increase that they asked for so that we can have that equity with them, that we're not losing too many attorneys, either to the prosecutors or to the private industry. At this moment, we're bleeding from our staffing right now. We're losing our attorneys by the droves. And what does this mean? If we keep losing our attorneys, the taxpayers are not going to get the value for what we're supposed to do, because we're basically training our attorneys for us to just give them to the private industry. Our goal is beyond just representing, and in the report that I gave to you, you'll see that we're going above and beyond the call of duty just to represent. We represent, but we just don't represent and release, we restore, because our goal is to put individuals back into the community so that they can be productive and they can add to the tax bracket. We cannot continue to do all that we want to do to support our community, to add to public safety, if we don't have the people to do it. So I'm just asking that we get that step increase that the prosecutors are asking for, that we get a supplement for our CPDs. The CPDs, they're the backbone of what we do. When we lose attorneys, we expect them to pick up where the attorneys have left. It will be really, really almost a crisis for us if we don't have our CPDs to pick up when we lose attorneys. And we don't want to lose our attorneys because it creates a backlog and is a waste of money for the taxpayers. We're also asking for money to create 3 more conflict offices. As you heard from the prosecutors, they are working on getting more funds for conflicts. We're asking for 3 offices in the rural areas. That's where we're hurting the most. This is going to be in the Macon, I believe. We're asking in the Macon Milledgeville Regional Office. We're asking in Columbus, Americus, Albany, and we're asking in South Georgia, Tifton, Waycross. That's where we're really hurting at this point. And we have to make sure that our rural areas are not suffering and being able to be productive as well. That's all we're asking for at this time. And I will answer any questions that you might have.
And all that's in your amended budget request?
Yes, sir. Everything is in there.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's the driver behind the increase in the conflict cases that you all are experiencing?
Well, the same thing that's happened to the trend that we have, where we have a lot of increase in cases, period. Sometimes because of COVID, the backlog that's caused by COVID has actually kind of flowed into the conflicts as well. And in our office right now, we're changing the way we provide services. We're actually creating regular offices so we can have attorneys who work for the state, because that increases accountability and that reduces the cost. We are going to retain contractors, independent contractors, to manage the third part, the third tier of our cases. As you know, we have the first one that's going to our CPDs. If we have multiple defendants, the second one will go to the new offices that we're creating to reduce costs. And the third one will go to our independent contractors. We find that to be more impactful, is more cost efficient. But what's really increasingly, to answer your question, is it's just a trend that we've seen in the increase of cases because of COVID.
I'm not sure that I understand how COVID links to conflicts. Isn't conflicts that you can't represent multiple parties?
Absolutely. So we have a big backlog. We've had that huge backlog even before I got here 2 years ago. And so that's one area, part of it. And the second is coming from that backlog that we've gotten from COVID. There's still conflict coming from that as well.
I understand. So leftover conflicts that weren't resolved previously that
A
still
lot of
exist.
it.
Okay. And then in terms of the rural areas, I think one of the benefits of the pandemic in terms of legal practice has been the transformation in terms of using technology. And so what I'm wondering is recognizing the shortfall in rural areas, are there ways to have individuals who may not live in those areas still service those areas a lot more, and then maybe go and make court appearances on an infrequent basis, but to provide coverage that way? Is that
And we've looked into that. So now we have 365, Microsoft 365, and to some it may be, oh, really, you're just getting, but we just got it. And that's been very impactful in making sure that we can provide services to attorneys for our clients through the attorneys who now have a way to retrieve documents and to make sure that we can use Teams in our meetings, and even to deal with our defendants through the social services that we're just providing statewide. So we're doing that, and we're reducing our real estate footnote and all of that by making sure that we can use the Teams more than we have used it in the past.
okay? And last question, if I may, Mr. Chairman, is in terms of the turnover, understanding that I think relatively speaking, compared to other attorneys, is public defenders really are public servants, just as prosecutors. The pay scale is relatively speaking pretty low. I personally am certainly supportive of trying to increase that. But my question is, I'm looking at the caseload, and it has, when 100% staffed, it's 296. When it's 90% staffed, it's 330. When it's 80% staffed, it's 371. That's a massive case volume, and it's not possible for any person to actually keep track of all that simultaneously. You can only work at a couple files at a time. So my question is how much besides the pay does this caseload impact your ability to retain your people as well?
Please, how much?
How much does the caseload, the volume of work that individuals need to do, how much does that impact your ability to retain your workers? In other words, are people leaving because they say, I just can't keep up with this caseload. This is too much. This is not doable.
Okay. So number one, people leave because of the pay. And then when they leave, the caseload that they have is going to have to be farmed to other individuals who still stays there. So I want you to follow. We lose people because we are not able to compete. And then what happens to the caseload? We're supposed to have 10 attorneys in a particular office. Now we have 6. Now the caseload that's supposed to be managed by 10 people is now going to 6 people. So that's how that flows. And so if we can compete just a little bit more, we might be able to keep our attorneys, and that will reduce the caseload per person. You're welcome. Thank you.
Judge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tell me what the starting pay for an assistant public defender is, and compare that to an assistant DA.
So right now, our starting pay, and that depends on the area. In the Atlanta area right now for public defenders, if you're talking about county funded, it is quite high. If you're talking about the state, we're still about 52, it's about 52,000.
And how does that compare to the public, to the assistant DAs?
The prosecutors, I believe they're about 56. they just come in depending on their experience, but the starting salary for both is 50,000.
Do you place your public defenders, assistant public defenders, y'all have a step system, I take it?
Yeah, we follow that.
All right, and you place them based on experience as they come in?
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be at the very beginning, it could be anywhere on the system.
But what we don't have is the funds to keep putting them where they need to be. There's a scale, but we don't have the funds to do that. You have someone who's been practicing for 30 years. We can give them the maximum that we have is nearly not even going to attract them.
Okay, so once they get placed, that's where they stay. Is that what
Absolutely.
you're telling me?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
CJCC. How much did she say? How much did she say they get paid? That's exactly what I could understand. That's exactly what new DA, assistant DAs get done. And we've always tried to treat them the same as the DAs, just for fairness sake. Yeah.
Afternoon,
you
Mr.
today?
Chairman. Members of the committee. Good to see you all today as always. Mr. Chairman, I'm on page 15 of my document. I don't know about your document. Sorry.
I'm on.
It's 30.5 is where we begin.
I just had it here a second ago. You're under the GBI.
That's correct. Yes.
Section 30, okay, that's a better reference point.
30.5.
Got it? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, 30.5.1 is the ad for $5,000 for all eligible benefit, all benefit eligible state employees. That is $100,932. And that does cover all of our state employees, state funded employees through state appropriations. We have 103 employees that are funded via other sources, either through federal grants or other funding sources that we have. It would take another $836,000 for us to be able to provide that $5,000 raise to all of our employees. And Mr. Chairman, as you know, money's tight at CJCC right now. We would ask that, and I know that we're not the only agency that's facing something similar to this, and I know your work is difficult, but we would appreciate any help that you could give us on
They
that
are considered
$5,000.
full-time state employees.
Pardon?
They are considered full-time state employees.
They are full-time benefit eligible state employees. That's correct. The only difference between them and the other employees is where the funding stream comes from.
Right.
30.5.2 is funds to allow state employees to drop to 40 hours of leave, and that's $13,928. We have the same situation here. It would take about $60,637 to provide this for all of our employees. 30.5.3 is the match for 401 contribution of $12,699. Once again, we have the same situation here. It would take another $84,525 to provide those contribution matches for all of our employees. And Mr. Chairman, if I could, our agency will work very diligently, and we will find a way to cover those costs in 30.5.2 and 30.5.3. So just know that those are there, but don't worry about trying to help with those. We will find a way to take care of those but anything that you can do to help us with 30.5.1 would be greatly appreciated.
And you know how this works from being up here. It's,
I know exactly how it works, Mr.
it
Chairman.
is probably just a little bit above my pay grade.
I know exactly how this works.
But
We-
it'll go up the chain. I mean, I guarantee you that we'll get an answer.
We appreciate your consideration.
Okay.
30.5.4 is the statewide assessment DOAS. 30.5.5 is our victim assistance division. As you know, we have seen a tremendous decrease in our VOCA funds over the last several years. We are able to use a percentage of those VOCA funds for admin purposes. And when the award was high, we not only funded positions out of that, but we replaced a legacy case management system. We provided statewide training and we were able to use those admin funds for a lot of different things. Over the last several years, we've had to rein that in to where the admin funds were only used internally. And now with that fund as low as it is, we actually have 8 positions that are no longer funded. So we have 8 vacant positions as a result of those VOCA cuts. 30.5.5 is the governor giving us back 5 of those 8 positions. So we appreciate the governor and OPB for their efforts, both in the retention and recruitment aspects of 30.5.123, and then in the adds of staff in 30.5.5. .7.1 is sexual assault centers. Our sexual assault centers receive state funding through the family violence program. We have 6 new centers that were added in fiscal year 20. They receive an allocation of $45,357. These additional funds will provide an increase of $8,933 for each of these 6 centers. That will allow them to receive $54,290, which is the same allocation that the rest of our sexual assault centers provide or receive. So this provides level funding across all of our sexual assault centers.
And that completes it.
I believe that's it, isn't it? Oh, I'm sorry, one more position. The JDAI position, that's a position that had been funded by the Department of Juvenile Justice. It was placed at the Council of Juvenile Court Judges through a MOU. That position came to us last year. So DJJ provided the funds through an MOU for that position for us last year. This budget request simply adds the money from DJJ's budget to our budget so that we will no longer have to do the MOU with DJJ to provide the funds for this position.
It's 30.5.6.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions? Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Director Neal.
Afternoon.
Can you provide some clarity in terms of what the impact will be of 30.5.5 in terms of having 5 instead of the 8? What's the cost of the 3 that we're losing?
So the caseload for our grant administrators as a result of the 8 open positions that we have now has went from about 35 grants that they're managing to about 70 or 75 grants that each one's managing. These 5 positions will get us back to manageable caseload. Ultimately, if we had 8 positions, obviously that would be better. I don't think there's an agency in the state, to be honest with you, that couldn't use another position here or there. We're no different from that. But these 5 positions would certainly bring us to a manageable level in that unit.
Okay. And then I'm certainly supportive of the increase in 30.7.1. And I want to ask, in light of declining VOCA funds and other revenues for our domestic violence shelters and our sexual assault centers, does this ensure that services are available at appropriate levels? Will there be any cuts, or can you comment on that?
So this brings the state funding to a level among all of our sexual assault centers is basically what this does. This does nothing to impact the cuts that are going to be faced because of the VOCA cut. Our VOCA grant award in the last 4 years has decreased by 68.7%, which is significant. We have budgeted very carefully, conservatively. We have awarded our funds based on 3-year continuation grants. We've had funds in reserve. We are using our reserves. Last year, the governor's office gave us $14 million in CSEF funds. We had to cut the VOCA grants last year to our partners, and it's not just domestic violence and sexual assault. It's also child advocacy centers, court-appointed special advocates, and the victim advocates and the prosecuting attorneys, district attorneys, and the Solicitor General's offices as well. We made those cuts last year to our VOCA grants, but we were able to fill that gap with the CSEF, and there were a couple of other things that we're able to do, and we were able to fill that gap. So our partners didn't face a cut last year. The federal grant cycle, obviously October 1st is when the next cycle will be. Right now, we are looking at the potential of as much as a 35 or 36% cut to each of our partners. That's domestic violence, sexual assault, child advocacy centers, CASAs, and victim advocates. We have made an application for ARPA funds. If we receive those ARPA funds that we have asked for, that cut will be considerably less. And I believe if we get the ARPA funds, I believe it'll be a manageable cut. But if there's an opportunity, obviously, to help in that area, I can assure you that our partners around the state could certainly use that, especially in the rural areas. Through the pandemic, the ability to raise funds has been, it's just been difficult for them to raise funds. In the rural area, there's not a lot of funds that they can raise on their own anyway. So in the rural areas of the state, they were very dependent upon the state appropriations and the grant funding that came from the VOCA and some of the other grants that we have. It'll be really, really difficult for some of those rural programs, especially if they have to face that 35 or 36% cut.
Thank you.
Judge? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a former DA, I cannot imagine to try cases without a child advocate there, or, you know, for those type of cases. If I take it, you expect these cuts in VOCA funding to continue from the federal government?
So the federal government passed a VOCA fix last year that will allow additional funds to go into the Crime Victim Emergency Fund that had been going into the General Treasury, deferred prosecution, and for example. We believe that will stabilize the fund in time. From what we're hearing from our federal partners, we believe it's going to be 2 or 3 years before the fund is stabilized. I don't anticipate it'll ever get back to the level that it was unless there's some additional large settlements like the Volkswagen diesel settlement. You know, if there's some settlements like that comes in, then clearly that Crime Victim Emergency Fund on the federal level will grow quicker. But this federal fix should stabilize it, and we should be able to see those grant awards begin to increase over the next few years. But it's going to take a little bit of time for that to be stabilized.
All right, thank you. And what if it all went away, what's the amount it would take to replace it?
If it all went away completely?
Yeah.
It's about, right now, we're at about 75 million a year. Is what we're granting out right now is about 75 million a year.
Okay, all right, thank you.
By the way, as a district attorney, you might be interested in this. The Prosecuting Attorneys Council has shared with us that if they have a 35% cut in their award, they will probably lose 117 advocates around the state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Ballinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you, just for historical perspective, can you give us a kind of a guideline on VOCA funds and kind of the ebb and flow that has occurred with VOCA over the last 10 years?
I can give you a ballpark. I don't have you. I'm going to let our CFO, Nathan Branscombe, handle that.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Chairman. Over the last 10 years, federal VOCA awards in the era of 2012 to 2014 were running an average of between 11 and $15 million per year, moving up and down. That was when the federal government and OVC determined that the Crime Victims Fund had a exceptionally high balance. That opened up the funding, and we received the first of our larger awards in 2015. That's federal 2015, so going 2014 into 2015 at approximately $60 million. That grew to $80 million and then $100 million by 2018. By 2019 and 20, we saw those awards drop down to 55 million, or let's see, 65 million and then $55 million respectively. Those are within plus or minus $2 million. And then in the present, the last 2 years, we saw our award come in, I believe around 35, 34, and we're anticipating that the next year's award will be somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 million.
Okay, so over the last 10 years, basically VOCA funds have doubled.
Yes, well, so
In a nutshell.
times 9 and then down to doubled.
Yeah, okay. I had one more question and now it's gone. Oh, well, I'll answer. I'll reach out if I, offline if I remember it.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add just a little bit to that. As the VOCA fund began to grow, we were able to identify areas of the state where services were not available, where victims were having to go 4, 5, 6 counties away to get services. And we were able to increase services into those areas of the state to where we could provide services, consistent services across the entire state. And I think that all of us want to have a state to where it doesn't matter what zip code you live in. If you're victimized in the state of Georgia, you can expect to have quality services provided. We also were able to go after some vulnerable populations with some of those increased funding. We really were able to ramp up some of the work that we have done fighting against human trafficking. There are multiple things that we've been able to do over the course of these last number of years as a result of those increased funds. That's the reason why we've seen the need grow as much as we have over the course of these last 10 years, is because of the way we've developed better, higher quality services statewide. I think that's something that Georgia should be proud of, that we've been able to do that. And it's unfortunate that now we're in a place where we are looking at the possibility of having to go backwards in some of those areas. But that is the very real possibility that we're looking at right now.
I'm very familiar with a lot of it, and you know, it's difficult for me to ascertain why the federal government sometimes awards grants like they do, where they, you know, the shelters, I had them all on a conference call, and last year we didn't think they were going to be able to survive without an influx of substantial money, and you know, this year I was hoping maybe they get some ARPA money. You know, the counties are all getting them, and you know, the counties are very dependent on them. The criminal justice system works through the counties probably much more than the state. And you know, I've visited most of the shelters around the state, and I just can't imagine those people who are in desperate straits more often than not. And you know, it's a single mother with 2 or 3 children and no place to go and no future ahead of them, and it's just it tugs at your heartstrings when you realize that the funds may go away to continue that process. And you know,
it's through those partners, Mr. Chairman, that we're able to impact Georgians in some of the darkest times of their lives by directly having services there for them in those times. And that's something I'm proud of, that we in Georgia have been able to do that.
well, I think we expanded them greatly too when those funds came in. We had several shelters added on, and it's just again, I wonder sometimes how the federal government manages those, and I've dealt with them in other agencies too, where they give you a lot of money to do a certain task.
Right.
And then once you get it going good, they start pulling the money back and expect the state or the local governments to take over.
And Mr. Chairman, we didn't ever anticipate that federal award would stay as high as it got
Right.
in 2018. It's the reason when that award came in, we did a lot of one-time funding, vans for shelters so they could transport victims, different things like that that provided one-time funds instead of services that needed to be ongoing. And we left that grant at 75 million. The anticipation was that with the grant that we awarded last year, we would go back out for a competitive bid, and we would not continue at 75 million. I think we anticipated going down to about 60 or 65 million through a competitive bid. But when COVID hit, it increased the expenses tremendously for our partners. Domestic violence shelters, for example, still had the cost of their shelter, but now they couldn't put all those folks in the shelter because of COVID. Now they're having to put them out in hotels and spread them out, and a considerable amount of expenses that they didn't have previously. So we felt like that under that increased demand, it was not an appropriate time to go to competitive last year. And that's the reason we maintained that 75 million last year. We're prepared to go competitive this year if we need to. Obviously, it would be great. They're still under a lot of pressure from COVID. It'd be great if we didn't have to this year and could put it off till next. But we do understand that competitive grant is coming soon, and that we're not going to be able to stay at that 75 million level going forward. That was never our intention to stay at that level.
Well, I know what you go through, and I appreciate what you do, and I know it's a struggle sometimes. And you know, we would all like to think we had sufficient money to do everything we need to do, but that apparently is never the case. So.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, thank you all.
Accountability courts.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, Chief Judge Scott Smith from the Cherokee Judicial Circuit, which is Bartow and Gordon counties. I have the privilege this year of serving as the chairperson of the Council of Accountability Court Judges. I believe our request starts on page 15. I think it's 30.6.1. I'm going to give a few opening remarks about our accountability courts, and then I'm going to turn this over to Taylor Jones, who is with me. She serves as our executive director. On a personal note, I want to thank you all for letting us be here today. We appreciate this opportunity. And I, for one, am very grateful to you because you got me out of divorce court about 2 hours early this afternoon. So there's good things abounding in all ways with this. The Council of Accountability Court Judges was created by Judge Deal and his father's work, Governor Nathan Deal, and had a vision to create an agency that would oversee, provide guidance, and train the state's accountability courts. As of today, there are 173 of those courts across the state, various types, including drug courts, mental health courts, veterans courts, and DUI courts. It is the job of the Council of Accountability Court judges to set standards, to certify these courts, to create a peer review system in which we guide and direct each other in our daily work with these courts, and to provide a framework to establish uniformity across the state. We are also a shared services model, for we rely on the Administrative Office of the Courts and the CJCC to assist us, such things as HR and IT and fiscal operations of this council. This has been my life. I have been involved in the criminal justice system since 1991 as a prosecutor and now as a judge. And it has been probably the most meaningful thing that I do to assist the people of the state of Georgia in rescuing family members, brothers, sisters, sons, and daughters from the grips of addiction. It is fantastic as a judge and as someone who's been involved in this process to actually see success out of our citizens, to turn their life around and have a positive impact on Georgia as a whole. With that being said, I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Taylor Jones to present our precise request. One of the things I do want to point out and emphasize is pursuant to Bill 1013, which was dropped by the Speaker, one of the things we're going to be asking for is some increase to help us create more mental health courts in this state. Of the 173 that we have, only 37 are mental health courts right now. And as you know, Georgia has a very serious problem in the area of dealing with folks who have severe mental illness. It is one of the things that clogs up the criminal justice system. The jail is probably the worst place to try to treat someone who has this type of illness. So we will be asking for some assistance in that light, in keeping with the speaker's initiative to deal with these issues. Thank you for your time.
Any questions from any committee members? I just like to say I'm a real advocate for accountability courts, and I just have watched, and I've been involved with some of the judges are friends of mine, and instead of just bringing people in and finding them or send them off to prison and send them out, keeping track of them, making sure they're getting a rehabilitative process has really been a boon, I think, and the statistical information will show that it's been a very positive impact on the society. And I've got several requests for some more accountability courts. So
Well, I thank you for that. We appreciate your support.
well, I think it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Judge Smith, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and to members of the committee. I'm going to work to paint the current picture of Georgia's accountability board courts while talking through our budget request. I think you started off doing that for me, Judge Smith. But I'm going to start with the line items that are in your tracking sheet, and I'm going to talk about a few items that are not in your tracking sheet. I know that I was able to provide the committee, I think it was Friday, a copy of a PowerPoint presentation that summarizes our request, as well as some documents related to our FY21 performance data and some cost savings information. So I'm going to start with line 30.6.1 through line 30.6.4. This request reflects the statewide changes in a total amount of $30,771. The next line is 30.6.5, which provides funds in the amount of $400,689 for one adult felony drug court and one adult mental health court in the Columbia Judicial Circuit. And we will be asking for the committee's favorable consideration of these requests. The next items I'm going to cover are not in your tracking sheet, but I wanted to start off with saying that accountability courts throughout the pandemic, whether it was virtually in a hybrid format or in person, served program participants. They were supervised and they were held accountable. And to that end, accountability court demand in our state remains high. We have a notice of intent to apply process that we execute through my office. So that's where we hear from jurisdictions where they tell us if they're interested in starting a new accountability court, and we're able to communicate that in this fashion and through the governor's office. I spoke to 2 courts a moment ago in the Columbia Judicial Circuit. There's actually 13 additional courts that want to start this year in fiscal year or upcoming fiscal year in 23. Those courts are the Thomas County Mental Health Court, the Cherokee Circuit Mental Health Court, the Tawallaga Circuit Mental Health Court, Douglas County Juvenile Mental Health Court, the Dublin Circuit Adult Felony Drug Court, the Columbia Circuit Veterans Treatment Court, the Tawallaga Circuit Veterans Treatment Court, Catoosa County Family Treatment Court, Barrow County Family Treatment Court, the Macon Judicial Circuit Family Treatment Court, and the Paulding County Family Treatment Court, and lastly, the Cherokee County Family Treatment Court. So those 13 plus the 2 in Columbia make the 15 that want to start in fiscal year 23. So we are respectfully requesting the committee provide funds in the amount of $648,274 to support the listed implementation courts, mental health implementation courts, I should say, and $895,764 to support the felony drug, veterans treatments, and the family treatment courts listed. The next area that I wanted to discuss today was the accountability court case management section of our work. Case management is an essential function of what we do. These positions, the case managers' tasks include, but are not limited to, participant assessment. So assessing the participants to make sure we're getting in the right type of participant, planning participant goals, linking participant to services, and of course, monitoring their progress and helping to hold them accountable. Accountability courts, I wanted to say, have quickly worked to rebuild their census since the lifting of the statewide judicial emergency order in June of 2021. We saw a 60% decrease in the number of new folks coming into our courts following the judicial emergency order of March of 2020, so when it was initially enacted. Since that time, there's been a 73% cumulative increase in the number of new participants coming into our programs. Now, as the members of the committee are aware, accountability courts are a sentencing method. So superior state and juvenile courts, as they work through these backlogs of cases, we expect to see our courts positioned to serve more participants this year and beyond. To help support the court's ability to monitor these participants and recruit and retain these positions, we're respectfully requesting the committee provide a 5% salary increase to the current case managers. This would be a total amount of $222,706. We're also requesting funds for 20 new case manager positions in the amount of $1,270,800. These positions have been previously requested by our courts and have gone unfunded through our competitive grant process. We haven't had the funds available to be able to support that. The third request is to support our superior state and juvenile courts to work through that backlog of cases. So this request is for our existing courts. We're looking for the committee to provide an amount of $772,276 to support our existing courts. And through our analysis, we believe we'll be able to serve an additional 277 participants in fiscal year 23. We are also respectfully requesting that the committee provide funding for training in the amount of $352,000 and for our treatment fidelity monitoring program in the amount of $25,000. Should new courts be able to be funded, we're going to have to train them. And one of the things that we require per our rules and our standards and our best practice is that they complete implementation training through the National Drug Court Institute, and they also participate in our new judges and new coordinator training at minimum. The training funds were reduced in FY21 as a result of the pandemic. Performing treatment fidelity, technical assistance is another area we're asking for your support in. Treatment fidelity is a way for us to monitor the evidence-based treatment that's being delivered in our courts, and it also helps us to monitor the appropriate use of state funds, and it's required by our rules. These funds were reduced in FY21 as a result of the pandemic, and we are starting to return to that on-site technical assistance. So as we begin to close, I did want to highlight a few of our performance measures, and again, you have those reports. As a reminder, an accountability court participant continues to be one who commits an offense as a result of their substance use disorder or their severe and persistent mental illness. We are not serving those charged with gang-related activity, sex crimes, or that have serious violent criminal history. Last year, our court served 2,603 new participants, making the cumulative total of new participants since fiscal year 13 served through Georgia's accountability courts, 29,276. Accountability courts participants maintain their sobriety throughout the pandemic. Last year, our courts performed 543,357 drug screens. Of those, 93.7 were negative. And this is during a time when our state saw a 29.4% increase in drug overdose deaths between June 2020 and June 2021. Our recidivism analysis remains good. Our most recent analysis examined 20,500 accountability court participants. This data was collected between fiscal year 13 and, calendar year 13 and calendar year 2019. We know our courts and our participants continue to have lower recidivism rates compared to similarly situated offenders. So as an example, we know an adult felony drug court graduate 3 years post completion of the program is rearrested at a rate for a new felony offense at 22%. For a mental health court graduate, 3 years post completion, it's 18%. We know our courts remain more cost effective for the eligible offenders that we serve. As an example, for every state dollar invested into one of these programs last year, there was $4.46 saved. We continue to be thankful for your support. And I know Judge Smith and I are happy to answer any questions or provide any additional information that you may need. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We have any questions? I will say you asked for a lot.
I understand. And we recognize that and would be appreciative of any favorable support you're able to provide.
Well, it's a growing field, and as I said, it's been I think it's had a positive impact, and I think a lot of people are very supportive, particularly inside the criminal justice system that see what happened, that observe what the reality, what you do. So, but it is a lot.
I understand.
So we appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Commission on Family Violence. If you could just stop by one of these desks and hit whichever, it's good. Okay, now if you pull it out, the mic, There you go.
Sure thing. Thank you.
Gotcha.
Thank you for members of the committee for giving us the opportunity to present to you this morning or
Could you
this
speak up
afternoon.
just a little?
Is that better?
There you go.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity to come and present to you about the great work at the Georgia Commission on Family Violence and to review the line items that have been recommended for the FY23 budget. I'm going to briefly walk through the 5 recommended line items that can be found on section 18 at the top of page 8 of 23 in the House track sheet. Line 1 reflects an increase of funding in the amount of $38,243 to provide the $5,000 cost of living adjustment from the governor's recommendations, and that is for 8 full-time employees at the commission. And this would be tremendously helpful for us to make the positions more competitive and to help with the retention of our very passionate and very expertise-specific, knowledgeable team. Line 2 represents a $27,064 increase of funds for these to allow for state employees to do the leave withdrawal up to 40 hours for the full-time employees, consistent with the standard across the state agencies. In line 3, you'll see an increase of $9,469, reflecting a change in the employment retirement system contribution rate. Line 4 contains the requested amount of $64,031, and this request is to provide the funds, the 25% match required for the state, from the state for the federal funded programs, and these are for the 2 VAWA funded programs through the commission, which are the Fatality Review Project and the Law Enforcement Training Program that we offer. And the final line item request from the commission, this is what I'm going to spend a little time giving some context around. This funding is in the amount of $31,620, and this is to allow for the implementation of a murder-suicide support group reflected in line 5. So the Georgia Commission on Family Violence is seeking the opportunity to launch this program for survivors of family violence, murder, suicides. And those are incidents where a person kills 1 or more individuals, usually an intimate, current or former intimate partner, sometimes children or a bystander as well. And then that person dies by suicide. Each of these incidents tends to leave behind a tremendous number of survivors in its wake, and in a particularly close-knit or small community, such as in rural Georgia and smaller areas, one murder-suicide event can reverberate throughout the entire community, leaving severe trauma and grief in its wake. Just for a little bit of information and background, there were over 1,500 family violence fatalities in Georgia between 2011 and 2020. 35% of those were the result of murder-suicide incidents. Georgia currently ranks 4th in the nation for the murder-suicides, behind California, Texas, and Florida. Currently, there are no other specialized resources statewide that are offered for this, for the unique issues for this population of survivors. If funded, this clinician-led and evidence-based program will be the first of its kind in the state, and it will be also the first of its kind nationwide to focus specifically on the unique and challenging trauma that confronts the survivors of a family violence, murder, suicide. In 2016, the Commission's Fatality Review Report was received national recognition and notice for the attention it focused on the study of murder suicides because of the prevalence of this problem nationwide. One of the key findings from that report was that an extensive search for murder suicide specific resources yielded an overall lack of services for the unique population. Additionally, traditional grief counseling is inadequate for these survivors, and typically clinicians who are not specialized enough, frankly, to meet these needs. Finally, these survivors were constantly asking and searching for support systems with other peers who understood what they were experiencing. And frequently you would find, or the report noted that occasional short-lived small peer-led groups would come and go, and they fluctuated in and out of existence, but they lacked the clinically supported involvement of a professional to address the lingering symptoms of that trauma. So as an agency, we've been contacted on a regular basis from survivors and service providers, both in our state and across the nation, seeking assistance and understanding to locate a service of this kind, but one has yet to be identified. And that's because our support for murder suicides project is in and of itself a unique project. It's not really something that's been found across the nation. So we receive a lot of attention and get calls for leadership in this area. So we recognize also that murder suicide incidents are scattered throughout the state. So while we've seen, just for example, between 2020 and 2021, a 58% increase in these incidents, they don't necessarily happen substantially enough in one community or another for that community to have or decide to specifically designate its own resources in that specific area. So those survivors tend to feel isolated from receiving the support they need and don't tend to be able to find peers that can speak to them in the same way. And the other thing that's unique about this request is that we believe there's a need to support survivors of not just the victim families, but also the person who committed the murder suicide. That family is also a part of that survivor network that needs assistance. So we were able last year through the Department of Public Health, through a partnership with them, to create, to train 40 clinicians in a specialized model called restorative retelling, and prepare them to address the survivors of this trauma, and to lead a co-facilitator support group, and also from that to offer individualized, specialized counseling on an ongoing basis. And so the funding we're requesting will provide the startup and give us an opportunity to build on this model, and allow for us to start 5 online support groups within our state. And those are the line items that we have requested, and we would ask for the committee's favorable support in those areas. And I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
We have any questions? Hearing none, we appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Department of Law, Mr. Attorney General. I know you weren't in here, but as you look through your part of the program here, it's anything's got an S, which is a statewide common budget change. You don't have to speak on unless you have something that's unique to that to your agency.
No, sir, we don't. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good to be with you. Thank you very much for having us today. And I believe it's page 18 of 23 on your track sheet. Section 33.1 and 33.2 are the sections that I'll be addressing. I'll start with 33.1.7, which is provide funds for 12 positions to establish a gang prosecutions unit. That's $1,318,436. It would fund 2 senior prosecutors, 6 prosecutor positions, and 4 paralegal positions. I want to thank the governor, the speaker, and others for working with us on this gang prosecutions unit. Obviously, our authorization bill passed the House last week. We appreciate that. Public safety and addressing the rise in violence has been a top priority for the state, for the governor, for the legislature. As the Georgia Gang Investigators Association has noted, 60% of all violent crimes are gang related. And so the state currently has put resources toward investigating gang crimes at the state level, but lacks the authority and the resources to prosecute these cases, which is where our office would come in. And Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we have a good model in our human trafficking prosecutions unit, which I'll mention in just a minute, working with DAs, working with state and federal partners as well. And having a gang prosecutions unit in our office will make the state more efficient by allowing existing investigators to work with state prosecutors in order to prosecute gang crimes. 2 particular areas I would point out are multi-jurisdictional cases. We know that gangs are operating in multiple counties, multiple jurisdictions. And also we know that there's gang activity in the correction system. So whether you're DJJ or corrections, we've got folks that are working on that. Oftentimes those facilities are in smaller districts, having the state have the ability to work on those crimes inside versus and allowing DAs to focus on those outside the facilities. We believe would be helpful. And in the GBI reported 493 gang cases that it investigated in 2020, 553 in 2021, an increase of over 12%. 33.1.8, provide funds for 3 positions to expand the human trafficking unit to address anticipated workload. 317,484 would fund 2 prosecutors and 1 victim advocate. Again, I thank this legislature. I thank the governor and the speaker and others for the support you've given us for this human trafficking units, which started in 2019. Obviously, the courts closed during COVID, but we've ramped back up. You're hearing more out of our unit. In 2021, the Human Trafficking Prosecutions Unit initiated 25 cases, arrested 9 individuals, investigated and prosecuted 51 defendants, and rescued and assisted 107 victims. And additional resources would obviously help us to grow those numbers. Unfortunately, there's no shortage of activity in this space. So we would appreciate any consideration there as well. 33.1.9, provide funds for 2 cybersecurity positions, 234,428. Those would go to an infrastructure manager and an applications manager, protecting the department's critical systems and safeguarding the state's sensitive information. And we get information from all different agencies in state government. Protecting them from digital attacks has never been more important. An infrastructure manager would help manage the implementation of the agency's security plan and provide for security of the department's IT network. The applications manager would ensure that the most up-to-date technology is utilized along with necessary software updates, patches, and other necessary capabilities in order to maintain the security of the department's software and applications. And just to give you all some context, there are only 10 IT positions in our agency, an agency that has 320 total positions. And there's only 1 position dedicated to performing these regular patches and updates for over 700 endpoint devices and 100 servers. And there are only 2 positions dedicated to the 76 major software applications and subscriptions under contract, in addition to the 2,312 minor versions that we have. So this would be a great need and a big help to our agency. And then 33.1.10, provide funds for 1 assistant solicitor general. 151,097. Right now, the way that the Solicitor General's unit is set up is we have a Solicitor General and 2 deputies. To round out the entire unit would make sense for us to have 2 assistants that could do, younger lawyers that could help with research and that sort of thing. Additional resources. We obviously had increased demands just from our appellate practice just generally, both at the state and at the national level. And this would help us as we've got increased demands for amicus briefs and other things along those lines. So that would be at least a first step to help us round out our Solicitor General's unit that was begun about a decade ago. And then our Medicaid fraud unit 33.2 are just statewide changes. And so we would I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee had and appreciate your favorable
Well, I
consideration.
appreciate that. And I appreciate all the work you do. And I was just stunned today as I was looking up some statistical information for another bill that I have that we had 695 murders in the state of Georgia last year. And I've been out of the system for about 10 years, but it used to be about 300, 350 every year. And I just can't imagine. I know we've gained a million people in the last 10 years, but if gang activity, and I've seen some of it, is the impetus for this, certainly we're on the right track by increasing your ability to deal with them.
Well, I appreciate you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Carr.
Representative Holcomb.
In terms of the IT, I'm definitely supportive of that. And isn't it true that law firms and legal agencies are being targeted for cybersecurity because of the confidential data that you store? And so it's really important to have all of that protected, correct?
That is correct. And we've seen it with state agencies. We've seen it with school boards and others. We want to make sure that we can maintain the highest integrity.
And then in terms of the request on 33.1.8 for 3 additional positions to help with human trafficking.
Yes.
What are the current resources that y'all have?
So we have 3 prosecutors, we have 2 investigators, we have 2 analysts and a victim advocate.
Okay.
And an admin.
With 25 cases, it seems 3 prosecutors can handle that unless, are they handling other cases too? Are they only working this or are they working on?
Those
other
are the
stuff
ones
as
we
well?
just initiated last year. So we're doing sting operations like Operation Not Forgotten that we've done with the feds. There are others that we're working with. Those are just the cases that we initiated in 2021, not going back to 2019.
Okay, I understand.
And we
but
can get you, I can get you the caseload going
But-
back to the beginning if you'd like.
I trust you. What you're trying to do is to build the team for what you think the overall state level of resource need is, right?
Correct. And the team feels that they are at a point that they cannot accept more. If we could add to the team, then obviously we could add more cases.
Got
working
it.
with-
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Hearing none, I appreciate the, I'm sorry, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The human traffic unit, you have an investigative arm?
We have 2 investigators in that unit. We wouldn't have that for the gang unit. We'll be working with the GBI on that.
Okay.
The GBI gang unit there. So many resources have been put toward the gang unit at the GBI. We also work with the GBI on human trafficking, but we do have 2 investigators in our human trafficking unit.
For that? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And on the gang side, do you work with local prosecutors at all?
You do, no doubt. It's concurrent jurisdiction.
Right. That's what I was
And again, I am supportive of what they do. But if you got a case where, we just see that, again, gangs don't stop at the city or the county line. And particularly if you've got cases that are multi-jurisdictional, you got folks working in North Georgia and Middle Georgia, it's an efficiency issue there, but we're going to work together with federal, state and local. And again, you got to have the federal partners in it as well. And again, the way I look at it is a force multiplier. It doesn't take anything away from DAs, doesn't take anything away from anybody else. Work with sheriffs, chiefs of police, but it allows the state to have a presence in there as well.
Okay. And do you work with the local DAs for the grand juries that they bring in? How does that work?
Yeah, right. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how that works? This is Wright Banks, our chief deputy.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Certainly, we work with we don't have any independent access to the grand jury. We access the grand jury through the local prosecutor. When we have a case that we're going to indict, no matter what area of prosecution that we might be handling, we contact the local district attorney in order to get time with the grand jury, since the DA manages the local grand jury process.
All right. And I take it most of that work is done here in the metro area?
Most of it's done here in the metro area, certainly in the human trafficking area. Most of our work has been done here in the metro area, largely because that is where the cases have presented themselves and there've been some larger operations that happened here.
Okay. But outside of the metro area, you are having cases out there as well?
Right. We've prosecuted cases out in other circuits. I think one of the first cases we ever did was out in the Okmulgee circuit, where we worked with the local district attorney to indict that case.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's it, Mr. Attorney General. We
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
what
Mr.
you do.
Chairman. Appreciate you. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your favorable consideration.
Department of Defense.
Chairman Hitchens, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Major General Tom Carden. I'm your senior servant, the Georgia National Guard. I'm joined today by Mr. Joe Ferrero, our Deputy Adjutant General, Mr. Kenley Finlayson, our State Finance Director. As you all know, the 15,000 men and women in your National Guard have been pretty busy here lately. In terms of state fiscal year 2023, we only have one recommendation that's been included in Governor Kemp's budget proposal. It's under military readiness. You'll find that on, if ours is the same, on page 12 at 20.2.6. It's $127,747 for the operational cost associated with the bowling building over at Millersville. It was formerly a youth challenge campus that we shuttered based on the budget cuts back during the initial throes of the pandemic. We need to maintain that facility. That infrastructure allows us the capability to compete for additional force structure and capability in the Georgia Department of Defense as we move forward with our force structure strategic plans. That's really all we've got outside of our normal operating budget. Appreciate your support and favorable consideration, and I stand ready to answer any questions you might have.
And I hate to make you wait all that time for this, but we already dealt with some of this in supplemental and
Yes, sir.
continuation, so.
Yes, sir.
I understand perfectly. what
We're
you're
honored to
talking
be
about
here.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Have a great day.
Pardon and parole. Again, I hate somebody's got to be last or next to last, and I know it's sitting out here may not be the most enthusiastic thing you've done today, but
No problem at all. I just hate that the Department of Defense is going to put it on me. I was planning to have the shortest presentation today, but they may get me by a few seconds. But thank you, Chairman and distinguished committee members, for allowing us the opportunity to be here. Talk a little bit about the State Board of Pardons and Paroles and our FY23 budget. Our budget begins on page 19 of the tracking document. And if I can just start off by introducing some of our executive staff. And that is, many of y'all already know my Deputy Executive Director, Ms. Rita Rocker. She is also the Victim Services Director, and many of y'all know our Legislative Liaison. We also have Kristen Kinney. She is our CFO for the agency. Ms. Felicia Holloway. She is our Division Director of Field Services. And the newest member of our team, our Clemency Division Director as of January 1st of this year, Ms. Crystal Moon. So great team, and they keep me straight, and Rita reminded me not to dally up here and get right down to the point. So I'm going to follow your guidance, Mr. Chairman, and start off with our one unique line item, and that is line item 35.2.6. And it is to provide funds for the assessment of parole guidelines and sex offender risk levels. And this recommendation is for $200,000. As it relates to the assessment of parole guidelines, the utilization of parole guidelines is a statutory mandate for the board. OCGA 42-9-40, entitled Parole Guideline System, states in part, the board shall adopt, implement, and maintain parole guideline system for determining parole board action. The industry standard or best practice when it comes to guidelines and risk assessments are that they be revalidated every 5 years. Our current guidelines have been in operation or in place since July the 1st, 2017, and therefore we're at the end of that 5-year period and it's time for a revalidation to occur. In reference to our sex offender risk levels, during the last general risk assessment revalidation process, the board determined that parole eligible sex offenders needed further analysis. Convicted sex offenders present a unique public safety risk challenges and do not fit neatly into a general risk assessment structure. Therefore, the board undertook an intensive analytical project to develop a unique risk assessment tool normed on sex offenders convicted and sent to prison here in Georgia. This new assessment was implemented and has provided the board with the most advanced, scientifically validated risk assessment instrument in the nation when it comes to sex offenders and their likelihood to reoffend either sexually or violently. Therefore, it is no doubt that this risk instrument has enhanced public safety for all Georgians. And in an effort to comply with industry standards and ensure that we're using the most up-to-date risk assessment and guidelines when making crucial clemency decisions, we ask the committee for your support on this one line item. And that will conclude my comments, and I'll stand by for any questions.
Is that ongoing, or would that be a one-time funding?
You know, I almost said one time, but it's every 5 years. So
That's a little difficult to deal with in budgeting. I guess we have to be reminded every couple of years.
absolutely. And in years past, we've been able to try to find the funds from within, but with the last 2 years of budget reductions, we've had to come to the committee and ask for support in that area.
Chairman Ballinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wondered, with regards to the risk assessment for sex offenders, how that kind of melded with or dealt with the sex offender registry review that does level everybody and does level the sex offenders, how that differs or how it's the same, or what do you take the leveling that has occurred from sex offender registry review board? Have y'all taken that into consideration?
Absolutely. Part of our risk assessment, if that individual has already been leveled by the sex offender registration review board, that is heavily weighted with us, especially when it comes to a predator. That will pretty much guarantee that they come out on a high level. Many of the individuals that we deal with have not been leveled by the sex offender registration review board. And so as we go through our process, if we identify through our risk assessment that that individual is a high risk to reoffend either sexually or violently, we send that information over to the registration review board so that they can use that to begin a leveling process on those individuals.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I appreciate what you do. Get a question? Representative Holcomb, I'm sorry.
Of course.
I was almost out of there.
You were, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quickly, I appreciate what you said about the assessment tool and how that's helpful in you making your analysis. Are you also going to track to see the performance over time? And so that helps you make the predictive decision, but then to see the actual performance over time. And
Absolutely. Through this revalidation process, that is one of the things that we're going to be doing both with our general guidelines and risk assessment and our sex offender risk assessment, is to see how predictive and how it has worked over time, and then tweak it in those areas that we need to make it even more effective.
okay, thanks.
And I don't think any more questions, but I have questions from time to time for your agency, and people on this committee present questions to me. And I really particularly appreciate Rita she's always got a rapid and very adroit response. And I really appreciate that.
Fantastic. We are here anytime y'all need us. We're here. And we just thank you for your continued leadership and guidance.
And I didn't know how many people in my district were in prison until I got elected. I know.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee members.
Last but not least, Ema Homeland Security.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hey, how are you today?
How are y'all? I appreciate you saving the best for last and putting us up here.
Well, we'll keep the
Yeah.
last every time if that's what you
That's
like.
right. And I think we do, so, but that's fine. We usually make it quick and painless for you, sir. Call your attention to page 12, and that's where we're at, or 13, excuse me. I got it wrong. 13, and we'll start with 27.51. Everything is basically the same. It's already listed. Our budget is unique to us, much like CJCC's is it's partially federally funded, not wholly. And so because of that, some of the numbers will not add up properly whenever you take the total number of employees we have and divide by that, you don't come up with 5,000. And so we would just ask that the committee take a deeper dive just into see if there's availability there. We do have 153 employees, which of 75 are fully federally funded. Other than that, we are partially funded in some capacity by state dollars. And so if you look at the numbers that were presented, it does create some shortcomings to the tune of roughly 704,840. So we would ask that the committee review those numbers and give us favorable approval on that.
That's a common problem, and I've told everybody else that I don't have an adequate answer, but we dealt with it some in the adjusted budget, and most of that money was forthcoming. So I can't imagine that certain people to do, and I'm very familiar with what goes on over there and how they fund it, but that certain people would get the raise and other people wouldn't, just because their position is paid for by somebody else.
Yes, sir. And as you know, I'm not telling you anything you don't realize, that the silos of the money, we've got certain funds where we have enough money to cover those individuals, but I can't use that funding anywhere else.
Yep.
And the one caveat too that's with ours is the way the federal government provides ours. We're only allowed to use 20% of any of our federal funding at the state level. And so because of that, we use every bit of our state dollars, and we're using those to support other agencies through other grants that go. So if we are having to make adjustments, it's ultimately just going to pull it right out of the pocket of other state agencies, because that's the only place we have to go borrow from. So.
Any questions? Appreciate you waiting.
Yes, sir. Thank
You don't.
I saw
Al Williams isn't here today. I guess you're taking over for him, huh?
Yeah, I share a suite with Mr. Williams, and he regretted not being here and asked me to make sure I picked up the slack. But I'm just curious in terms of a broader sense of recognizing that I imagine that part of what y'all do is difficult because you're trying to predict the future in terms of what the needs are and what the disasters are and what the emergencies might be. Can you just share with us, because I'm curious, what you worry about the most, and are there any particular areas of a potential emergency disaster that you feel that you're under-resourced and could use more for?
And I have our director of admin here with us as well, and he can help answer this question. One of the biggest things that we face, just like everybody, is the amount of how far we're stretched thin. We've increased our total employees from 2017 from 117 to 153. And that's still some openings that we would like to fill some jobs. Obviously, we're very proud of being successful at every mission that's assigned to us. There becomes a problem though. If you're good at it, they're going to keep giving it to you. And so we've been, COVID taught us some valuable lessons, but it also brought us a lot of things. And eventually, probably going into fiscal year 24, we're really going to have to take a look at some of the things that were purchased that became state property that are now ours, that are going to have to be maintained and moving forward. And so you mentioned that one of the unique things about our state is the tornado outbreaks. And so with the number of folks we have forward placed a lot of items around the state. COVID has given us the opportunity to do that. But I think for us, tornado outbreaks in our state, that's the one thing that really cost us a lot of money and doesn't always rise to the level of a federal declaration. And so that's a very heavy burden on us as a state, and resources, and being able to balance what we can do and support those local economies and those local jurisdictions with the funds that we can provide them, whether it be through the grants that we have available to us or through resources that we've been able to accumulate through other disaster.
Any other questions? Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We're adjourned.